Hello, this presentation today is going to go over the process of replacing the high pressure fuel pump on a 2013 Ford Focus ST. Little background on the problem: the car presented itself with a check engine light and the code P0087, and the vehicle would not exceed 40 miles an hour with the accelerator on the floor, and the turbo had been programmatically disconnected by the computer. The check engine light was on, and we got the code P0087.
Before we get started changing the fuel pump, we need to talk about some safety points here. The fuel rail pressure can be 2,500 psi. It is recommended to bleed the fuel pressure off and disconnect the battery before continuing. That was not done for this job, and we did not have any problems, but that does not make it right. This vehicle was parked for about a week before the pump was replaced. The battery was left connected and the fuel system was not depressurized prior to removing the lines. There was no pressure on the lines when they were removed, and only a few tablespoons of fuel came out onto a towel that was positioned under the lines. Remove the cover from the engine by gently pulling up at its 4 snap mounts. Prepare to remove the intake duct for access to the fuel pump by disconnecting the vacuum hose and removing the intake air sensor electrical connector. Loosen the 2 clamps at each end of the intake duct and remove the mount bolt in the center with an 8mm socket. Lift the intake duct out of the engine compartment and set it aside. This picture doesn't show it the best, but once the intake duct is out of your way, you'll easily be able to remove the foam noise damper and disconnect the electrical connector from the fuel pump. Remember to place a shop rag under the fuel lines before you remove them. We only got a couple drops out of the input fuel line shown here, but about 2 tablespoons of fuel came out of the high pressure steel fuel line. In this case, the clearance between the pump and the fuel line coupler made it impossible to fit the fuel line removal tool into the coupler. Cut the line removal tool in half and stick the small end in the line fitting. Then there will be just enough clearance to fit the tool between the line connector and the pump. Press on the tool and the input fuel line should easily pull off of the fuel pump. Remove the upper high pressure fuel line from the fuel pump using a 17mm line wrench. I have to confess, I did not have the 17mm line wrench, so I used a regular 17mm open end wrench and did not have a problem. Remove the bolt from the upper line clamp using an 8mm socket wrench. Remove the lower flare nut for the fuel line from the high pressure rail using the same 17mm wrench that you used to remove the upper line. There is a second line clamp halfway down that can be reached with an 8mm socket and a short extension. If you are not replacing the line, you don't have to remove the bolt completely from the clamp to position the line out of the way of the pump change. Plastic sandwich bags were placed over removed fuel lines to keep out debris during the pump change. Remove the metal bracket over pump electrical connector using a 10mm wrench. Clean the dirt and debris out of the area the best you can before you start removing the pump. Remove the 2 pump mount bolts evenly while holding the pump in the seated position. This pump is under an extreme amount of pressure from the spring that is on the pump. After you remove the two mount screws, pull the pump out of the housing and lay it on the bench. Remove the tappet and inspect it for any signs of abnormal wear. This one was a little dirty but showed no signs of wear. Look down inside the fuel pump housing at the cam lobe for signs of abnormal wear on the cam lobe. At this point, you may have to rotate the crankshaft to position the cam lobe to its lowest position. This will make it easier to install the new pump so you don't have to fight the heavy spring. This one was at the low point, so there was no need to move the crankshaft. This picture was taken before the tappet was removed from the pump housing. After you remove the tappet, inspect it. You'll have to clean it and coat it with fresh engine oil and reinstall it into the pump housing. Coat the O-ring on the new pump with engine oil and carefully place it in the housing. Install the two mounting screw bolts evenly, one turn at a time, making sure the O-ring goes into the housing without being pinched or displaced. Torque the mount bolts to 177 inch-pounds and then an additional 45 degrees. New bolts are recommended, but the original hardware was reinstalled during this repair. Reinstall the metal bracket over the pump electrical connector using the two bolts and a 10mm wrench. The bolts should be torqued to approximately 89 inch-pounds, which is significantly less than the torque that was applied to the pump housing mount bolts. Reinstall the metal bracket over the pump electrical connector that was removed earlier with the two mounting bolts using a 10mm wrench. These bolts were not torqued anywhere near as tight as the pump mounting bolts. The manufacturer recommends replacing the steel line between the pump and the rail whenever it is disconnected. In this case, the original steel line was reused. Torque the steel line nuts with a 17mm line wrench to 133 inch-pounds and then an additional 45 degrees. Make sure the two line clamps that were removed earlier are secure. Push the fuel input line onto the new pump until it clicks. Install the electrical connector on the new pump. Install the foam noise damper over the new pump. Reinstall the air intake assembly by securing the two clamps and the one mounting screw using an 8mm socket. Reconnect the vacuum hose and the intake air sensor electrical connector that were removed earlier. Reinstall the engine cover. Reconnect the battery if it was disconnected. Using your OBD code reader, erase the code P0087 to clear the check engine light. Start the engine and check for fuel leaks. Road test the vehicle and verify proper operation. When you return, recheck the line fittings again for fuel leaks. Thank you for watching this presentation. Hopefully you found something helpful here. Stay safe and good luck.